everyone, and welcome back to my yearly roundup of all the weird news that has happened in 2024. I'm back today with a few more weird tales from the year just past. This isn't your usual news roundup, this is strictly the stuff that makes you go, what? As quite frankly, the regular news is far too depressing and genuinely terrifying. So instead, we'll be exploring a few lighter, weird and wonderful stories that may have not made it into the regular newspaper during 2024. Now that's not to say that these stories don't dally with the dark side, because they most definitely do. But there's also some light-hearted strangeness too. But don't worry, if anything is going to be hideously awful, then I'll give you a heads up first. So with the disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into March. Before we kick off today's stories, if you are new here, then hi, my name's Nikki, and I make podcasts, YouTube videos and TikToks about all sorts of weird stuff. So if you're into that, which I have a sneaking suspicion that you might be, then please hit subscribe so we can hang out together again. And if you're not new here, then welcome back, old fiend. Nice to see you again. Now, this series takes a lot of planning and effort to produce, and it's just me making everything. So if you fancy supporting what I make to help me create this series and beyond, then please check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Macabre London for lots of bonus content. Now, let's get into the episode. Now, if you've ever been lucky enough to while away an afternoon in a Parisian cafe, you may be under the impression that speed of service by the waitstaff is not a huge priority. But the French would disagree, so much so that they have brought back a defunct race to prove it. After course de cafés, the waiters' race returned to the capital. Many competitors speedily made their way through the streets of Paris with overburdened trays, just to prove a point. Over 200 professionals took part in the race on March the 24th, 2024, which just so happens to be World Waiters' Day. The race, which spans 1.2 miles and goes in a loop starting and ending at Paris's City Hall, has some strict requirements in order for people to take part. Firstly, they have to look the part. Any participant has to don the standard waiter uniform, which historically dates back to the 19th century, when the classic white shirt, tie, waistcoat, apron, black trousers and a thin black jacket, if they so require, was part of the uniform. Now, whilst not all establishments in Paris choose to make their waiters wear such a uniform, it can be noted that most French bistros opt for the simple and easy-to-spot outfit, so much so that it's now become synonymous with French cuisine. The next thing that has to be done to take part is to carry a tray. This tray has to include the following specific items which cannot be lost along the way: a glass of water, a coffee, and finally, a croissant. All items must stay intact and not be spilled to avoid being disqualified. To win, all the participants have to do is make it in the fastest time across the line without spilling anything. With Paris being the host city for all things Olympics in 2024, the waiters' race was brought out of retirement in order to highlight the light-hearted combination of French culture and sports. This historical race started in the early 20th century, but had been on hiatus for 13 years. But when Paris was announced as the next city to host the Olympics, it seemed like a good idea to make it part of the year's celebrations. The original waiters' race saw glasses and bottles placed on trays, the traditional napkin placed over one arm, and the standard uniform had to be worn. As waiters were required to dexterously manoeuvre themselves around the course, which looped around the busiest areas of Paris, they were demonstrating how well they had to do this on a daily basis. Now, the waiters' race, even though it originated in Paris, has actually spread out all over the world to at least 53 other countries, which hold the same event. But back to the day itself. Most people who entered the race managed to finish in around 20 minutes. But the judges were keen at the end to make sure the correct amount of points were rewarded. Spilled beverages and dropped croissants eliminated many of the participants, and some even arrived with broken crockery, which was a complete no-no. Or should that be non-no? Croissant! The two winners were eventually crowned with a men's title and a women's title. Sammy Lamris took the men's title at just 13 minutes and 30 seconds to complete the course, and Pauline van Weermish took the women's title at 14 minutes and 12 seconds. Both champions received a lovely prize of not only a medal, but a night's stay in a luxury hotel and 2 tickets to the Olympics opening ceremony. So, all in all, a pretty good prize. Alongside the fun and frivolity of the race, there is also a serious message which accompanies it. Firstly, the race has partnered with the Eau de Paris organisation to educate people and businesses on the reduction of single-use plastics, particularly water bottles. In an initiative to reduce single-use plastics, Paris has committed to businesses allowing people to refill their own reusable water bottles at the city's thousands of cafes, bars and restaurants with no charge. Secondly, the race helps to highlight just how integral waitstaff are to Paris's culture and how much they contribute to make sure locals and tourists alike can partake in the fine dining, cafe culture and wine bars which are so vital in defining what makes Paris the way it is. So the next time you're waiting forever for the bill to arrive, remember the Paris waiters' race and maybe cut your server some slack. One of my favourite things to do when I have a spare 5 minutes, which isn't very often, is to watch parrot videos. Parrots fill me with such joy. They're cheeky little blobs of feathery fluff, and what I like even more is when they've mastered the art of talking. So when I heard about our next story, I knew it would be making it into the Weird News Roundup straight away. So the story starts a few years before in 2020. When Jade, Elsie, Billy, Eric and Tyson, 5 African grey parrots, were handed over by some members of the general public who were finding the birds were just too much for them to take care of. Lincolnshire Wildlife Park took on the birds as they already had a number of African greys that had been given to them in exactly the same circumstances. These new additions to the zoo, however, were a little bit different. After a little while of settling in, the birds started to come out of their shells and began chatting away amongst themselves. Interestingly though, the keepers noticed instantly that these birds were different to their others, and the language that came out of them was definitely not what they were expecting. The zoo, which now holds the largest colony of African greys in captivity, has a huge number of them. Well over 100, which rivals the wild populations of them, making them a very important group for potential release back into the wild. But these new additions, which had all arrived from different owners around the country, all seemed to have one thing in common. They swore like pirates, or actually just like parrots. These parrots were kept on their own, but soon other nearby parrots, who could overhear them, started also swearing like troopers. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't be a problem. In fact, it may well be encouraged. But the issue was these parrots were on show to the visiting public, and people were starting to complain. Eventually, the parrots' language became so bad that a sign had to be put up in front of their enclosure, saying that no one of a nervous disposition should go near those particular animals, in case they heard something they weren't going to like. Now, as time passed, a new tactic was taken by the zoo to try and curb the animals' behaviour. The 5 parrots would be introduced to a large flock to try and dilute the swearing down. And so, in 2022, the 5 bad-mouthers were put in with a big group in the hopes they'd conform with the rest of the group dynamic. Now, bringing things up to the present day, the adjustments seem to have gone well. and not only in terms of clearing up the birds' potty mouths. The animals, which according to the birds' keepers, thrive in large flocks and are now developing their own dialect. When watching a video taken by keepers online, I noticed that they actually mimic humans very infrequently and have now developed a strange combo of parrot noises, but have also learned to mimic some more exotic birds and perhaps the odd budgie or two, as there is a lot of chirping and burbling happening. Now, luckily the birds didn't all take on the habits of the 5 bad birds, but have refreshingly begun sounding like parrots. But admittedly, it was a huge risk, as it could have majorly backfired. Another 2 cussing birds were identified, one named Captain and one named Sheila. But luckily, the majority of the zoo's visitors don't seem to mind. In fact, the wildlife park confirms that since publishing the story about the naughty parrots, paying guests are coming along solely to see the dirty birds. So despite the zoo's owners being worried about the knock-on and detrimental effect of the animals' behaviour, it's actually proved to be quite the opposite. Now, it should go without saying that parrots don't make good pets. They can live up to the ages of 100 and beyond, and African greys in particular tend to have a natural lifespan of anywhere between 40 to 80 years. So it's safe to say that it's highly likely a parrot will outlive a lot of people, and as many elderly people get them as pets to keep them company, that means a lot of parrots end up being rehomed as they're not wanted by other family members when their owners pass away. Most species of parrot are incredibly loud, destructive, and can even be aggressive. So it's a long commitment to make to an animal which can't stand you. So no wonder many people don't do the proper research and then give up on them when they realise it's far too difficult. Sadly, this is how Lincolnshire Wildlife Park have ended up with their hundreds of birds. And what we have to remember is that the reason the birds have ended up swearing in the first place is due to the homes they've lived in, and all they're doing is mimicking. They don't actually understand what the words mean. It's the impact humans have on wildlife in action, and you can't say that the birds are to blame for their subsequent behaviour. Hopefully, with the continued visits from the curious public, this should help with the conservation of the species for the future, and something which started off as being a bit of a worry has actually resulted in something rather lovely. But that's it for this story now, so as the parrots would say, go on then, off. Thanks for joining me for that selection of weird stories. I hope you enjoyed them, and if you did, there will be more along soon. So make sure you're subscribed or following if you're not already to keep up with the series. If you like the show and what I make in general and you want it to continue, then please consider becoming a Patreon supporter like our executive Patreon producers, Christina, Christoph, Heather's Leg, Lisa, Mary, Ravel, Sally, Sam, Sarah, Terry and Veronica, and all of our other patrons too. If you sign up to Patreon, you get access to my other podcast, Having a Problem, which is a lot of silly historical-based fun, hosted with my fiancé Neil, plus hours of other bonus content too. If you'd rather just send a tip or a little Christmas gift from my Amazon wishlist, then I would massively appreciate that too, and I'll leave all the links in the show notes in case you want to check them out. And thank you for a couple of the gifts that have already arrived. One of them didn't have a note in them, so thank you very much. It's very, very sweet of you, and I hugely appreciate it. An enormous thank you for even considering doing any of those things, particularly when I know things are tight for a lot of people. So it really does mean the world to me, and I'm always so pleased and grateful when listeners like you want to help me create this haunted history empire we can all call home, and it feels very good to know that you do. Now, if you have a moment, it would really help me out if you were to share the show around, tell your friends, leave a comment and repost my social media posts. And that's all more helpful than you know in getting the algorithm to recognise my content. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I've been Nikki Druce. Remember to stay spooky, and I'll see you ghouls next time for April.